So welcome to tonight's Dharma study group. We're going to be discussing the recovery of what I call your 360-degree life, which is like your full spectrum life. Before we talk and study together, I'm going to ring the bell and we'll sit in silence for a short while. Just as the bell returns to silence, I welcome your mind to do the same. I'm not suggesting that that's an easy thing for your mind to do, but I welcome you to rest mentally. To support the process of your mind resting, if you find that it's particularly busy right now, you may give your thinking mind something to hold on to or a place to rest itself. Such as noticing the places where your body right now makes contact with the ground. You may join your hands in Anjali Mudra. And with a bow from your head to your heart, appreciate your efforts to be here and your willingness to learn. And you may release your hands and open your eyes. So the topic, the recovery of your 360-degree life, is a topic that I made the title up for. I encountered this as a useful model many, many years ago, and I want to talk about it through two different lenses. So first, I'd like to know who in the room is unfamiliar with the childhood but lifelong toy called the kaleidoscope. Is there anybody who does not know what a kaleidoscope is? Okay, so that's valuable. A kaleidoscope, as I see it, is a great metaphor for what we're doing when we introspect or study ourselves. Because with the kaleidoscope, for it to work, several things have to occur. One is you have to put it up to the eye so that you can see through it. I mean, it's quite likely working even if you're not looking through it, but you can't see or learn from the contents or the experience of the kaleidoscope unless you put it up to the eye. Usually to look through it, you have only one eye and you close the other one. So you have a temporary one eye closed, one eye open. Another element that's required for the kaleidoscope to work is the amount of light coming through the other end of the kaleidoscope. If the kaleidoscope were darkened on the other end, you wouldn't see much but blackness. And if you aim the kaleidoscope towards the floor or towards a dull spot in the room, you don't get much luminosity when you're looking through the kaleidoscope. And then even if you're turning the kaleidoscope to look at the designs that are being created, you can't see them very well. So the first thing is the eye that can see and is interested and curious. The second is the light that comes through the kaleidoscope. And the third thing is some curiosity or a willingness to have awe about the little turn the kaleidoscope makes and how the gems inside create a pattern. Well, countless patterns, countless, many patterns with the same gems. The little turn, I think we could say as if there's no two snowflakes that are the same. There's no two kaleidoscope moments that are the same either. But the contents inside the kaleidoscope, however it's made, those contents keep turning in there. And sometimes we very much like what we see. Like, I'm gonna hold this kaleidoscope still because I really like what I'm looking at right now. But if you get fixated on that, and yoga calls that attachment, if you get too attached to that, it's very hard to live while walking around with a kaleidoscope super still against one eye, hoping to keep seeing the same thing. And sometimes you see what you don't want. If the kaleidoscope is not so interesting, you don't want to see that particular one. It's like less beautiful or less luminous or less fancy, so you turn it quickly to go to the next one that's going to create joy for you. We call that attraction and aversion. Like the longing for what is pleasing to you and the preference for what's not pleasing to you. Yoga also calls that raga, means desire, and dvesha means hatred. We can say grasping and aversion. Have you guys tried those on in life? They're considered two of the causes of suffering. You've probably experienced, since you're interested enough in the topic on a Friday night to be here, you've probably already experienced that grasping and aversion lead to suffering. Even if you get your desires satiated, that's considered one form of suffering. Because the more you get it satiated, the more you expect and or want it to be satiated. And that can become compulsive. You also may start feeling that the world owes you that which you desire. Because it turned out on these other occasions, and it was so satisfying. When you live in the West, where you have some will and privilege and resource to make the desires happen, we can start having a sense of aggressiveness or entitlement about that. Similarly with our aversions, we live in a world that lets us avoid what we're uncomfortable with to some extent. And if we do that really well, when we hit the kinds of discomforts that we can't say no to, we can't make go away, we haven't practiced the relationship to discomfort that lets us navigate it for awakening. So I've said to many students and clients over the years, if you're suffering now, let's say they're in their 20s or 30s, so this is a good chance to practice for by the time you're 70, if you had a life free from suffering altogether, you won't have the same flexible brain then, nor the same capacity for curiosity and skill building in relation to discomfort. Because the human brain, as it ages, has to be kept healthy, has to be exercised, and some of the ways that we exercise are when we experience discomfort. What do we do with it? How do we navigate it? So, any questions about the kaleidoscope before I go on? This little grease board was about a different discussion, so I'm going to erase it because it might be distracting. Okay. No questions at the moment. So that being said, our human system is born to pursue what causes it pleasure and to avoid what causes it pain. And that's at a biological, fundamental, neurological level. It's not a judgment when I say that it's not a good thing or a bad thing. It's a thing to know that your body, your biology, your neurology, they are programmed to avoid what causes pleasure. To avoid what causes pain and to seek what causes pleasure. If you didn't have that instinct, you wouldn't be able to cry out in earliest infancy to ask for food or warmth, or to ask to be more dry or less overheated or less overstimulated or more stimulated. So we cry out for things that our organism is asking for from the care providers around us. And we're all going to learn how to navigate that which is pleasing and that which is painful. And we learn to prioritize what works. That's a good thing. Except that it does become a more narrow perspective if, as we prioritize what works and we hit the stage in life where we can start prioritizing adventure or expanding our curiosity, if we don't get the chance to do that, our life continues to get more narrow. So a little image that I like to use looks like this. I'll put it up on the grease board. This is my version of what your life looks like. So when I say a 360-degree life, I'm referring to an experience that I had in my own life prior to recovery. Actually, it was the catalyst for my own experience of recovery, and this image comes from that catalyst moment. And some of you know the story, so you'll get to hear it again. So the 360-degree life refers to the experience of awe and capacity and vision that I had when I climbed to the top of a steep mountain in New Hampshire. I took on this backpacking trip to save myself from my own suffering, and it was on pure instinct. I really didn't know anything about backpacking. I didn't have any equipment. I didn't know how to cook in the outdoors. I wasn't prepared. I didn't go get the skills and the training. I just went. It was relatively impulsive, which was actually part of my life at that time was quite impulsive, left or right, avoiding the unpleasant, seeking the pleasant. And I was anxious and suffering. So I had this instinct. I packed the backpack. I climbed to the top of a steep mountain. I started too late, so it was pretty dark by the time I got to the part of the trailhead that you could actually decide what to do next. It was pitch black dark, and I had to keep going because I hadn't made the destination. So as I made the rest of the journey to the top of the mountain and the sun was coming up, the light was emerging, this too heavy backpack that I was carrying up a too steep mountain in the dark, I had to set it down. And when I set the backpack down and the light was rising and I was above tree line, which you can do on the East Coast pretty quickly, what I saw was expansiveness and light in every direction. You could see 360 degrees around you at the spot that I stopped. That was my destination on the map, on the little book. We used to use books, not MapQuest. We actually opened the book to read about the trailhead and how to get there. So I set down the backpack and I took it in, what I saw around me. I took it in and experienced silence and awe and expansiveness and grace. And because I had sort of tortured myself to get to the top of this mountain in the dark with a too heavy backpack, I also had to start moving my body to relieve the pain that I was imposing. And it was a moment of relieving the pain I'd been causing myself for years. Now, my instinct to cause myself pain, we're not really born with that instinct. But the way pain emerged as a paradigm in my life and anxiety became an overarching theme was because how I had to organize for the pleasant and the unpleasant in my particular family system meant it was a pretty constricted life. And that prioritization process looks like this. So we might have this 360 available, but we kind of start smalling it down. You can imagine if you had a Japanese fan that you had opened to 360 like this, and then you're born as that radiance, as some say in the tradition, undifferentiated ego mass. You're born like this porous, amoeba-like potential that isn't yet shaped or formed. You're going to start getting formed and shaped by your environment, including the other humans. The time in which you're born, the history, the culture, the family, the circumstances, the church, the community. So your 360 degrees starts forming itself, essentially it's conforming, so that it gets taken care of. You have to abide just enough with the other humans that you get cared for, and your impulse to satiate desire, your primal programming to avoid the unpleasant, it tells the care providers how to help you. So when you're hungry, you make a gesture and hopefully they feed you. When you're cold, you make a gesture and hopefully they help to warm you. And along the way, you're prioritizing what gets to be expressed. And when people have a certain amount of that prioritizing and their life gets really constricted, I call that your 40 degrees. The 40 degrees in here that you know, this is who I am, this is how I am, this is how I operate, this is what I believe, this is what I see. These are my identifications, and also those will be your attachments. Yoga uses the word attachment, like, I am a person who is smart, capable, competent. I'm a person who's a perfectionist. I'm a person who doesn't know how to feed herself well enough. I'm a person who navigates anxiety with anorexic or compulsive eating tendencies. This is me way back in my life. I'm a person who has too many jobs to try to finance college, and yet who's going to get it all done. So inside that 40 degrees, you can also say, I'm a person who plays the trumpet extraordinarily well, and a person who's a high-level athlete, and a person who's terrified socially, and who can't go to certain art openings or events in the larger community because my social anxiety is too big. So all of that identification is in here, and also in my journals from 1981. Yeah.
When you think about the 40%, what do you think about the 60%, or how much awareness?
It's not percentage, it's degrees. So think of 360 degrees like a full circle. So the 40 degrees is essentially, it's a random number that I had to choose to make a model to have a conversation, but it's the 40 degrees down to which we narrowed our lives into what we thought was okay to express or to prioritize or how we could behave. And what we leave outside of that in this other 320 are the aspects of ourselves that we learned we either can't know or we ought not own them. The other expressions, the other aspects of who you are, that if you were to be those things a little bit more expressively or magnanimously, you might risk your social belonging. So like rage. We call this, the 320 that remains out here, is sometimes referred to as your shadow. That which you're sort of storing. So your social persona might be outgoing and easy and kind, but you might store in here your rage or anxiety or your sense of despair. And a person might see you when you're in your 40 degrees, your outward expression, and they might not even guess that you have despair or poignancy or a sense of dread. Some people in their 40 degrees, they're not very competent, but in their shadow, they're highly competent people. It's just that somewhere along the way they realized that too much competency in their early life system was going to be a threat to other people. So they put it out here. Like a person could be highly intuitive, but when you're very young and you intuit something, you also might intuit, if I say that thing, somebody's going to get in trouble. Like if I say, Grandpa seems like an alcoholic, and then the family system comes crashing down, you realize you're told that's not so, or never talk like that again, or you get some message that that's not appropriate communication, not appropriate behavior. So you have to at some point decide what you're going to put overboard into the shadow and what you're going to live with. Which is why so many of my students who have addiction or eating disorder issues, which is in my book a form of addiction, their intuition got squashed. Even though they're highly intuitive people, they don't have access to intuition, even body-centered intuition, like what am I hungry for, when am I tired, am I actually thirsty? Because intuition can get pushed into the margins like this. Does that answer your question, Sam?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
So we prioritize, and in that prioritizing, we get to shape who we are. And in our culture, I said this several times today already, and I said it about an hour ago too. In our culture, we ask the question of children, and we ask the question of ourselves, like, who are you going to be? What are you going to do with your life? What do you want to be when you grow up? And the concept behind that is like, when you hit 20, what are you going to be? When you go to college, who are you going to become? It's like, you're going to do that thing, you're going to discover it in earliest life, and you're going to be it for the next 7 decades, God willing. It's pretty constricting just to ask the question, who are you going to be? Because who you can become is really expansive. You're going to be all things. To quote one of my teachers, Thich Nhat Hanh, you're going to have all the seeds of human expression available to you. Which ones are you expressing and how? We don't have to disown any of those aspects if we come into an understanding, a relationship with them. But we're asked early on, what is your identity going to be? What are you going to do for a profession is usually the question we're getting asked. Then you're told to chart your course towards that. If we ask the question, other than that, if we said, how expansive do you imagine you could be? Like, how creative can we help your life to be? How can we help nourish your spontaneity, your adventure, your acceptance of the human condition? If we ask those questions of our fellow humans in their youth, it would be a really different culture we live in. Do you understand what I mean by that? Do you ask yourself those questions? Like, how expansive can I be? How can I awaken my creativity and live my life with more spontaneity? Are some of you in the room, you don't ask yourself that question? And some do. Some are nodding their heads and some are not nodding their heads, yes?
Well, I think I was reading the Renaissance Soul and how you have this desire to go after many interests all at once. And so it kind of reminds me of that, how expansive can be. How can I go after all my interests if they don't really connect or it doesn't really lead to one career? How can I go after it all?
Yeah. And that's an interesting thing because I'm going to translate one other part of the question that I was talking about earlier today. When our culture says, who are you going to be and so on, is that we also have this misunderstanding that it's about us. So that somehow who I'm going to end up being will have to be a statement about me. What are you going to do with your life? And the word life is capitalized in that question. What are you going to do with your life? And yet the question that yoga would ask us is, how does life want to live itself through you? What's asking to come through? What's being called forth in you? And that question, how does life want to live itself through you, is like asking, what is your dharma? Or that unfolding which uniquely will come through you, but will likely lessen suffering, contribute to more harmony, and have great interpersonal respect for the human condition. a lot of the careers that we choose or the pursuits that we have don't deepen our sense of interpersonal respect for the human condition. They don't lessen suffering, and they don't create compassion and equanimity. So that's sort of where yoga has a different litmus test to be asking. I don't know this book that you're referring to, but I was just teaching in the prison this afternoon for the adults in our teacher training down there. And the question that we're asking them right now is, through this teacher training in yoga, how do you think life wants to now express itself through you? What contribution might you get to make as a result of being in this training? Not asking the question, like, now you're going to get to wear the label yoga teacher. That would be more like a Western imposition on the process that we're going through with them. The question is very different. How does life want to live itself through us? But in the West, we do have the capacity to pursue our personal desires. So looking through the lens of yoga, let's say I had my kaleidoscope and I see a certain vision and I want to pursue that vision. It's going to take great commitment and steadiness. It's also going to, for a time, require me to sort of blot out other things about life and try to keep just to my one vision. But how did I decide on that vision? If I decided for myself, and if I decided in a certain phase of life, I probably decided based on my conditioning. So the lens that I'm looking through before I even look at the kaleidoscope is already conditioned. And that's why in yoga we don't recommend deciding, or like earlier on. We want to, in a way, decondition the lenses, the mind habits, the clouding, so we can see more clearly. And if what you're called to pursue is that 360-degree life where you are contributing to lessening suffering, expanding equanimity, and deepening interpersonal respect on the planet, then as you're looking through that kaleidoscope, you have to look with great compassion towards your personal experience. It's not an easy path to walk. So can I go back to the drawing here? All right. So in this compressed experience of the 40 degrees, which I see as, in some people's case, like in my own life, I don't know how I could have done it otherwise for my earliest years. It's like a necessary compression for a time. The challenge that we face is that as we're compressing, these walls here that separate this 40 degrees, this is the known, and this is the unknown out here. And these boundaries can become more and more impermeable. They seem more and more stable. And if you were energetically a being meant to encompass 360 degrees, but you have to squeeze yourself into 40 degrees, you have a lot of energy in a small space. You have a lot going on in a too small space in here. And it gets to be relatively chaotic and quite likely pretty anxious. It's like the Jack in the Box. Do you remember we were talking on the way to the prison? The Jack in the Box is supposed to be compressed in there and you're turning the knob and the music is playing. And we're going to be delighted when the Jack in the Box pops out of the box. Or if you're like me, when I was a kid, I got scared of the Jack in the Box. You could tell the music was changing. It was getting a little bit foreboding, a little bit ominous. And then ding, the Jack in the Box popped out and you would get startled. So at a certain age, of course, you knew what was happening, but prior to that, it was a startle reflex, like, oh, there's the Jack in the Box. Well, he got compressed, then he got let out. Then we compressed him again because it was fun to recompress Jack and then to let Jack out of the box again and then recompress and then let him out again. But this compression here is not fun. Yes?
But don't you find that people that are in the 40, 40, they're sometimes it's so hard for them to break loose from that. Over time, it's like it's so sad because it's like there's so much more, but people just are so stuck.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
The only thing I would recommend to Andrea at this moment is that you don't think of them as other people.
Oh no! Hello. Yeah.
No, I'm not saying you're still at 40 degrees. I'm saying we all have the capacity to experience that compression of who we are. We prioritize certain things, and then we take this particular pie slice and we go out and look at the world through that, including our kaleidoscope.
And to break free from that, it's like, to realize there's, I've met people that have taught me that, not everybody thinks the same way I do.
Mm-hmm.
And that's awakening.
Yes. Yeah.
As I've gotten older, I hear people like, wow, I never thought of it that way. Maybe I need to try to understand your thinking.
Mm-hmm.
But to really do that is kind of taking a risk.
Yes. And you'll see in a minute when I talk about the risk taking, how do you do that here? What's required of us?
I have a question
Yes.
about, I feel that, I don't feel stuck in the 40 degree, but I feel that I sort of moved around that circle in my little pie slice. I'm going to take this slice and I'm going to move on to this slice.
Uh-huh.
And it's sort of like, because that's a container for daily life. Like you have to fall into some habit in order to just live your life. Do you know what I mean? And so I can hardly imagine how you could live moment to moment, day to day, taking all of the possibility at once.
Well, I'm not saying you can experience the entire possibility that encompasses day-to-day living at once. Like you can't now be drinking tea and also be sleeping. You can't now be swimming in the ocean and also be hiking Mount Hood. Those two things don't coexist unless you know something about the, what do they call that, sort of dreaming, lucid dreaming, which I don't know how to do. What I'm saying here is to encompass your humanity as well as your spirituality. But what we get to encompass are all the capacities that the human heart and mind can express. So we're less likely to reject, condescend, judge, shun, repress, suppress, make bad, make good, categorize, compartmentalize. This is essentially a compartmentalization that happens here. And then you meet someone who challenges your worldview. You can either decide that that's an aversive person and keep playing with aversion and grasping, or you can decide, that person just challenged my worldview, I wonder what I don't know. So one of the challenges that we face when this is that compressed is that we don't often recognize our own conditioning. We are like the fern trying to see its own pattern. For example, if you prioritized being a highly competent person, have you generally speaking maintained your competency throughout life? Do you feel comfortable dropping that competency completely? No. Because other people may not pick it up, or because other people are relying on you, or because it's satisfying to be confident. This is just one expression of being human, right? So we've chosen something that we've then reinforced, and that reinforcement process, yoga calls those samskaras. Last week I was talking in the Dharma talk about people who are consistently early. Wherever they go, they're early. They're not even on time, they're early. And they love to be early. And their pattern is, I'm early. Is anybody like that in this room? You're early?
5 minutes early is late.
5 minutes early is already late. Okay, yeah, so you're on the early side. Then there's people who are consistently late. And they're always about the same number of minutes late. Have you seen that? Now, the people who like to be early might not like the people who are always a few minutes late. And the people who are always a few minutes late might not really like the person who's always early, reminding them with a toe tap that they're late. And there's people who are consistently just on time. Well, each of us is actually mapping our biorhythms and our patterning throughout the day. And of course, sometimes there's traffic. But the early people know to leave a certain amount earlier to still be 5 minutes early, which is now late. And the late people, actually, we're accustomed to saying, oh, there's traffic, shoot, I'm late again. But it's not uncomfortable enough to have changed the departure time for setting out for that destination. I'm using this example because we've patterned certain things, not just the physicality, but the mentality also.
So it causes me great anxiety to be late to
Mhm.
this. And so I was like working with that on my way here.
Yeah.
That like, oh, this is
We already knew we had to be developed.
Yes.
Slavery.
But it was still causing me anxiety.
No, it still will cause her the anxiety
Yeah.
that's hers, because one thing you've prioritized is being early, and now you're going against that grain.
Totally against
Yeah,
So
so
I get anxious about being late, but I'm always late. I mean, I'm a late runner, but that doesn't mean I'm not anxious about it.
Mhm.
Right.
It always feels out of my control still.
That's part of the patterning that you have in here. We all have our patterning. That's what yoga calls when we say yoga chitta vritti nirodha, which means yoga is the cessation of the fluctuations of the mind. We could say yoga is when the patterning stops being so overpowering and we exist. In the third sutra we hear, and then you abide in your essential nature. Once that patterning fades, when the fluctuations become still, you just get to rest in the essence of who you are. But most of us, back to Kate's point, have taken our pattern and we keep imposing it on our life out there. So we're still doing that same thing. So for people who actually have addictions or compulsions or disordered patterns around work or food or gambling or shopping and so on, or we actually have anxiety or depression, we're very lucky. Because the symptoms you're getting from this 40 degrees are letting you know something is out of balance. It's James Hollis who said on a recording I was listening to from him recently, he said, suffering is like neurosis that hasn't yet found its meaning. But were it to find its meaning or its expression, it wouldn't be neurosis anymore and you wouldn't suffer from it. So having a few painful spots here in this compressed place, experiencing suffering is like actually an act of grace. If you're in enough pain, you'll want to do something about it. Just like in early life, when you were hungry enough, you had to cry out. If you were too cold, you had to make a statement. But we learned somewhere along the way to hone or suppress or disguise our expressions, trying to get our needs met. And then you're in enough pain that you have to cry out to a bigger source, which is like God or grace or consciousness. And that crying out, Rumi talked about it as the love dogs that are barking all night. They're crying out for God. Don't damn them. They're making the good cry. He says it in one of his poems, differently than I just said there, but he's basically saying don't damn yourself for crying out. Crying out is what love dogs have to do. Crying out is what humans have to do when you're in pain. You have to cry out.
What's the name of that?
Rumi, R-U-M-I. Rumi.
Love dogs.
The name of the poem, I think, is Love Dogs. Yeah. We can Google it later. I don't have it memorized.
Thank you.
Yeah. So when you first start sort of dismantling or dissolving some of these barriers, what you're doing is going against your samskaras, your deeply grooved mental pathways. You'll start challenging them. I think sometimes we want to eradicate them, like eradicate one of them all at once, like your life has been out of control, so then you say, I will never eat brown sugar again. Or I will never fill in the blank because it swung in one direction very painfully, so you're going to eradicate that behavior, that substance, that thought, and you're going to go the other way. There are those of us who experience breaking out of sorts, but we're still taking a lot of our conditioning with us. This might be how your pie slice is moving around the globe here, right?
Yeah.
We have these breaking outs and they're like, oh, I'm a whole new person. And there are new things to you, but the freshness of experience should also be dissolving some of this patterning, and that's how you'll end up knowing. If you're your whole new person for a time, but then you realize the same old you has made itself known in the whole new you, then you go, well, I took some of my conditioning and I brought it with me. I mean, go figure, sort of the brain developed that conditioning when it was its most flexible, most porous, most vulnerable, and therefore it's its most deeply embedded conditioning. So you brought some of it with you, like fear of annihilation, one of the causes of suffering. You brought with you your apprehensions. So as we start moving some of these barriers and dissolving them, it either happens because we invite life to come in, or because we invite ourselves to be courageous, to have a little adventure out of the compressed area.
What is this?
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the things I've noticed in my life is, like going through early abuse and stuff like that. I've learned those things to be a positive in a way, in a lot of ways, because I can understand if I don't negate the, if I accept the what I originally felt like, but I see that in other people, it causes me to have empathy.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of positives about the negatives in our lives.
Yes.
That's
Yeah. Well, what happens here is you either invite life in, I was just saying, so let me explain what that means. You're near to somebody whose expression you find aversive. And you say, oh, how could I be curious about that? Or I wonder what in me feels aversion towards what in them. And you start making your mind more porous, not more closed. Or you're near to somebody and you say, wow, I really envy that they're so luminous or gregarious or steady, or they're so consistent. And often it's the qualities in you that you haven't been able to own. So you see it on somebody else and you might envy it or disdain it. You say, wow, I wonder how I might experience luminosity or steadiness. Like, can I accept that human expression in them without envying it, which distances my ability to experience it? Can I see it, admire it, and be curious as to how that might come through me? Can I re-inhabit that? And that which you disdain, can I have less judgment and more curiosity about it? Might I see the essential human being underneath that noisy behavior that I don't like, or that possessive behavior that I feel aversion for? So there's a process of inquiry when you're near to somebody who stimulates your aversion or your envy, which is essentially your desire. You get curious, and you're inviting life to enter. And then parts of you start to sneak out, as it were. I actually think like karaoke is a healthy, therapeutic event. You can go and try it on. I don't know if all that alcohol is necessary. Maybe it's like, what do they call that? Greasing, Jay? What do you call it? Social lubricant, yeah, the alcohol. I'm not suggesting the Japanese food over alcohol karaoke, but something like karaoke where you try it on, or you go to a dance that has you don't have to conform to a certain dance pattern, as we called it in Cambridge, Massachusetts, in Harvard Square when I was coming into my recovery after the mountaintop and the yoga got established. Then I also went to this event called Dance Free, where you could just dance in whatever way you wanted, and the body was improvising, and it's like, whoa, part of you just sneaks out right there, because it didn't occur to you that you could move your body like that before, because the body was holding the pattern of conditioning. And so you start finding ways for that expressiveness to come out. And so this starts to widen. And in that widening process, we want it to go in both directions. In that widening, you actually experience a physiological sense of ease, because what was compressed now has more room to express itself. You accept more of your own humanity and the humanity of others. Today I was driving back from Salem before this event, and as was Angie and a couple others, and you get to see the driving patterns of other humans. It's a great place to practice yoga. And most of you know I've said this before, so I do repeat myself. 20 years of repetition. That I learned to drive in the back seat in upstate New York. And what I learned about driving is that other people are assholes. Like everybody else on the road is an idiot. And they don't know what a fucking turn signal is. I learned that too. I learned all about life from the back seat while my dad was driving and my mom was up front smoking, chain smoking. So when I'm driving, I have the likelihood of old New Yorker voice, like my dad's voice, in my head about the other drivers. But you can also practice. I just had come from the prison and I was asking the guys, like, how do you want life to express itself through you? And the person behind me was tailgating me, which is I'm aversive to tailgating. I've been in 3 car accidents as a passenger, not a driver, and one of those was getting rear-ended on the freeway. So when this person was rear-ending me, I thought to myself, what kind of person do I want to be? I don't want to be the sort that tailgates other people. I don't know what he is doing behind me, tailgating me. I don't want to be the sort of person who tailgates. And then I thought, I don't want to be the sort of person who hates tailgaters. So I felt bullied by the person behind me, so I found a way to change lanes. And I was like, just please go on by. Sorry to be in your way. But the first instinct was my dad's voice. The second was aversion for the person behind me based on both, let's say, car accident trauma and my father's voice. And the third instinct was, I don't need to be the sort of person who finds those people annoying. I'm just giving off my prana to that person, just giving my energy over to them. So I changed lanes. And so you get to ask yourself, as this is expanding, how does your energy want to express itself in the world, and what sort of things are you going to be valuing? And we just know fundamentally that if we keep valuing our aversions, our lives get more compressed and more constricted and more narrowed. And that which was meant to be 360 cannot live at 40 or 35 or 20 and be tolerable in itself. It looks for a way to break out. Sometimes that breaking out happens unskillfully, really unskillfully. And sometimes we break out by using our addiction, like a person who uses addiction to overindulge or overcome the pain of that 40 degrees or that 20 degrees, because it temporarily relieves the intensity, numbs the relationship to it, provides some soothing, and then we go back to our 40 degrees and our priorities, what we conditioned ourselves to be. So if you've been using addiction or behaviors like that, try to pan way back and ask, well, how might I be willing to let my energy expand beyond that which I keep controlling, that which I keep prioritizing? What might I be willing to do? So we don't have to break out and then pull back in, like get out of control, come back to control. You don't have to answer this question transparently if you don't want to, but I would be curious if anybody in the room has had the experience of feeling like really out of control and wanting to pull it back into control with a behavior of some kind. Mm-hmm. Okay, so there's just a couple of us who are really honest. Sometimes the out of control behavior is the way that you're thinking about something, and it might be really socially graceful, like you get a lot done, you're highly committed, and your to-do list is extraordinary, and it demonstrates your efficacy as a human being. That's also a kind of out of controlness. We don't associate that one with like binge eating or binge drinking or binge TV watching or binge journaling. So we don't associate it in the same way, but that feeling that we had to break out somehow is where I like to think of that suffering again as an invitation to expand and come back home to the 360.
I'm thinking about your family, one's family, and how, like, I feel that a lot of the limitation is conditioning that comes from your little tiny subculture you grew up in. So it's their top behaviors of like, these are the limits, these are the behaviors. And then in my own experience, I feel like as I've grown up into adulthood, I've been able to expand way out of that. And then I find myself having a challenging relationship, as I think most people do, like returning to my relationship with my mother, for example, and not feeling super aversive to it because I feel like, I don't know, like it's this constricted trap that I don't want to get into, but I also want to be aversive toward my mother, even though she may be still in the pie slice I'm not interested in inhabiting anymore.
Yeah. That was so well said.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of the challenges that we face when you go back, quote unquote, back to the family in which your conditioning happened, you can feel like that's a too small skin suit now. I call this the skin suit. That's a too small costume or a too small assignment now. You've grown beyond it, but you go back home. By the way, she's also regressing when you get there. It's not just we regress and our parents look like they've never grown or evolved, like they're still doing the same thing they were doing when we lived at home. They're also regressing when you get there. They have friends that play bridge and go for golf and have drinks and go to karaoke, and they might have full lives. We go back home and think, you're still behaving in the same way you were when I lived here. Yeah, they just regressed when you got there, just like you did. So that in her, which you have aversion for, might be many decades. Like you picked up on it in early life and organized around it, then you're outgrowing it. Then you see it in her again. And maybe the part that's afraid of going back gets to stimulate that aversion when you're in her company. This is where we start practicing the Brahma Viharas, which was our discussion last month. So we apply that really directly. And I'll talk about that in these bubbles that I didn't fill in just yet. I'll talk about that process in a few minutes. Mm-hmm. One of the things that happens in life that I want to name before I go on, because this little jump out of this 40 degrees is not little at all. It's significant. So in your early life, you're born with your right brain and your connection to awe and your capacity for shame. Then your left brain starts to come on board and you get to have a story about who you are. You get to have a narrative about who you are. Well, coincidentally, as the left brain is coming on board, so are your motor skills. You get to crawl faster and move away from the sources of care. You are crawling quickly away from parents, for example. But you can also crawl back to parents. You have seen this, right? Many times now. So in the process of that, just as you're having this sense of self and adventure and motor skills and a willingness to sort of break out of just being held and carried and, taken care of in this physical sense, you're also going to start hearing the word no. A lot. No, don't put your hand on the hot stove. No, don't go to the top of the stairs and climb down. No, we don't walk out into traffic. No, you can't poke your sister with a fork. Whatever you're going to start hearing. What the challenge is that your parents were programmed as organisms once you came into the world to make sure you survive. And so they're looking at your extra agency and motor skills and adventure, and they're saying, no, not this. No, that's dangerous, not that. No. And we forget to say yes to the small being. So just as you're having agency and mobility, you're also hearing no. Isn't that ironic? Louis Cozolino talks, I think, the most well about that. He's a developmental psychologist and he studied neuroscience. He's extraordinary. A book called The Neuroscience of Human Relationships. You can see him talking about being a parent himself in that book. So there are the parents saying no because they want to keep you alive. And here you are in this 40 degrees before you get to sort of break out of it. And you might hear this haunt that says, no, don't do that. You're about to get into trouble. If you break out of the 40 degrees into the unknown, you're about to get into trouble. Eknath Easwaran, I just love the way he uses his English. He's talking about when you're about to outgrow a samskara, you will have the feeling that you're just about to get into trouble. He says, keep going. The sense of trepidation that you're about to get into trouble is a sign that you're going in the right direction, he says. He's not saying go unskillfully or go chaotically, but just be aware you're about to outgrow something, and that can feel very scary. But it's a skillful outgrowing. Unfortunately, you learn not to go to the top of the stairs and just topple down. You're still here. Those care providers kept you from rolling out into traffic on your tricycle. And here you are. Now, some of you might have gotten way too many no's and a couple of other owies along the way, like Andrea was saying about early life abuse. I'm not saying that was a good thing. I'm saying there was enough care provided that you survived physically, biologically. I'm not saying that was all mentally excellent or spiritually fabulous, but here you are, and you get to make decisions now about how to expand this.
The other thing is that now I have a really good relationship with my mother.
Mm-hmm.
And my sister, her kids don't even talk to her.
Mm-hmm.
She's 91.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of sad, but it's like for me, I recognize all the good
Mm-hmm.
and just take her for who she is. you know.
Yeah. Yes. And when you can see with compassion somebody else's limitations, you're not stuck to your aversion about those limitations.
No.
When you can see it, you're looking at, here's how the human expression got formed in her. What did she have to prioritize? What did he have to prioritize in order to survive their own life? And what were the cultural and historical events? And like, here's what that looks like on this human being who happens to be your biological mother and might benefit more from your tenderness and compassion than a person's hatred or resistance. For which certainly her antenna picks that up. My antenna picks it up when I sense that somebody is aversive to me. And that's not a pleasant interpersonal experience. So what do you guys imagine lives out here in the unknown, in the bubbles that I didn't name? If you were to say, what else might we fill this circle in with? We're mostly in this room Americans. Were most of you raised in this country? So we have a certain amount of American conditioning, and we're not in one generation here. We span a couple generations. How old are you? 17. So you're the youngest generation here. I won't ask how old somebody is who might be on the older side of the spectrum, because in America we don't do that. But some of us are in the, we call your stage of life, the early Pitta stage of life. Many of us are still in the Pitta phase, that we're waning towards the Vata phase of life. That Vata is when you've gone from a certain middle stage and you go through menopause, and then you're in the end stage of life, and it's equivalent for men. So we don't have particularly anybody in the room who's still in the Kapha stage of life. So it's a good time to be growing and evolving. What do you imagine you would put out here in the unknown, things that you had to keep at bay for a time?
Creativity.
Mm-hmm. If you aren't sure what you put out here, ask yourself, what do you envy in other people, or what do you strongly dislike about them? Jessica, are you going to say something?
I'm trying to think of the right word.
Openness, gregariousness.
Mm-hmm. Okay. What else comes to mind?
Trust.
Trust. Mm-hmm.
Surrender.
Mm-hmm.
Humor.
Humor. Okay. So, might we hypothesize that serious and controlled and less gregarious are in here? For some of you? Not for you, right? So, what about for you?
Control.
Is out here?
Yes.
Okay.
Control.
Maybe too old.
And having to be on time.
Like discipline.
So, controlled is out here. What about seriousness? Is that out here?
Yeah.
Yeah, being too serious. You don't want that.
Concerns with what other people think, or, you know, yeah, just sort of an unfree, like they're not free to be themselves.
Uh-huh. Those people annoy you.
Yes.
People who are unfree. Okay.
Unfree.
Yeah, I put individuality in the
Thank
bigger
you.
part.
Individuality in here?
Yeah, like not able to feel like you're an individual, like feeling like you have to.
Like you have to conform?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Those people are annoying, all right?
So Sergio, could it, I mean, so you're saying this thing could include everything from like all these qualities to like being German, like
No. No, I asked that about being Americans because you can paste on top of this that we were raised in a culture that has privilege and emphasizes consumerism, materialism, commercialism, and right use of will to own things and possess things and become somebody. We live in a culture that That's already been imposed on our generations for generations.
I see. So you're saying there's cultural tendencies for us to share some of the same
Yeah.
limitations.
Yes.
Most of these words are pretty positive. I think, like, I would include like jealousy, anger,
Yeah.
Resentment.
Yep. Thank you. Jealousy, anger, resentment. I would put rage. Vulnerability, which I think is a positive word, but for lots of people it is not a positive experience.
Which one?
Vulnerability. Or we can say fear.
Hatred.
Hatred, yeah. They're sort of the things that we know we're not supposed to feel or experience because then we're not a good person. And for some of us, we're not supposed to experience our individuality because then you're not a good person in this family. Or you shouldn't be too serious because then you're not a good person as we are. And this is how we do it in this particular community or family or household. Or it's not okay to be too creative. We actually have to get stuff done. So how that gets formed, you can see that because we're putting this on the board together, some things are in opposition to each other. One person, spontaneity might be in here, and another person, control may be in here. So what lives in this area that you prioritize so that you could become yourself, you're going to start encompassing all these aspects. And the cool thing is, when you have a sudden experience of anger, or you feel the hot flash of jealousy, or a moment of fear, or hatred, you think, oh, God, I shouldn't be having that experience. First of all, it's not yogic. I'm saying this to tease you. It's not yogic to live with hatred, but it's not yogic to hate your hatred either. Or to damn yourself for experiencing some fundamental human expressions that, when disowned, become more powerful.
I have some heard somewhere that, we should be concerned if we're not feeling those things. Like there's a disconnect if we're not feeling some things like that strongly. Not that you live in anger against other people, but if you're not able to access emotions.
Yeah, I would say if we aren't able to access emotions, but what I'm not implying is that you get to be ongoingly emotive, impulsive, or out of control with it. And the bumper sticker that says, if you're not outraged, you're not paying attention. Do you know this bumper sticker? There's perhaps some truth to that. If you're not shocked, you're not paying attention. Like we aren't seeing how conditioned we are. We may be in the undertow of our conditioning so heavily that we don't know how conditioned we are, how colored our thoughts are. We might see somebody else's thoughts are very deeply saturated, very, very colored. Like if they're always complaining, or they always feel rage, or they're always politically in the trenches, you might think, oh, God, there's so much that person. On a spectrum, we have our own experience of deeply colored, deeply saturated thoughts and beliefs. So if you visualize these qualities here in a much bigger ocean, 360-degree sea of human experience, each one is a smaller wave. But put hatred in just a bathtub-sized ocean, and it has a pretty big wake. Put jealousy in a teacup-sized ocean of human expression, and it has a really big wake. It's much more disturbing that way. But to have these things more absorbed in that immense ocean, each wave makes sense. It rises, it passes, it expresses itself, it dissolves, and we keep remembering there's a bigger ocean of our humanity to which we're all hopefully connected. And then we have less inclination for aversion towards others or towards parts of ourselves. We'll be less compelled to grasp or to cling, to clutch at certain things in our identity as who we are when we behave like this and who we are when we behave like that. I like to say with life that your ocean-going vessel, that is your body and your life, should not be so huge that it can't feel the currents underneath it. Like it's so profoundly stable you feel nothing. I'm not really into those big cruise ships, for example. Nor should your ocean-going vessel be so small that it's likely to get flooded on a daily basis, that it's always capsizing. You're treading water behind it, trying to keep up. So yoga wants us to cultivate an ability to feel the ocean of our human experience. Not to be numb and aloof and like elevated from it, and not to be drowned by it so often. That's the translation of equanimity from last month's discussions when we talk about upeksha. Upeksha means equanimity in real living, a porousness, a buoyancy, a fluidity. So those of you who like to be early could experience equanimity in being late. Those of you who are chronically late might feel some equanimity in being early. You arrive early and instead of saying, God, what am I going to do with my times? Oh, I'm going to bask in equanimity. I'm just going to hang out right here. So towards these experiences in the human system, the potential for any one of these arises in us. A response recommended in yoga and in the sutras and also in Buddhism that we're going to practice now is called loving kindness. It means to extend loving kindness towards an aspect of yourself that now causes you trouble, or to extend loving kindness towards an aspect of yourself that now causes you to have grasping, desire, or envy or jealousy. So loving kindness is an interpersonal practice. We offer it towards somebody else. We can also offer it towards aspects of ourselves. Then it becomes an intrapersonal practice. So let me ask if for a couple courageous people, if you were to choose an aspect of yourself tonight that you'd like to extend loving kindness towards, the part that gets you into trouble from time to time, what might that part be called? The part of you that's petty, or the part of you that's super controlling, or the part of you that's defended, or the part of you that's impetuous? What might you call it?
I would call it the critical part.
The critical part? Uh-huh. You know, your critical part thinks that it's making these boundaries stronger to protect you. This is the nature of samskaras. They're intended to be protective mechanisms, so here you are. Critical part makes the walls stronger. Okay, so we can use that one. Does anybody else have a critical part? Let me just check. Okay. Right. What are some other aspects you might be willing to talk to with loving kindness? Yes?
Contradictory parts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's very heavy on the person.
Yeah, like a pendulum. Like this one and this one. And they're in contradiction with each other. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's the bind we have as humans when we have a shadow and a persona. It's not your bind alone. It is that bind that Carl Jung discovered and was speaking about so well. Okay, anything else? So I've got a critical part and a contradictory part. Okay, your anxious part. Okay.
The part that judges and isolates.
Mm-hmm. I have to start taking notes on this. The part that judges and isolates, the anxious part, the critical part, huh?
Timid.
The timid part, okay, and the contradictory part.
Envious.
The envious part, okay. Nobody said the sensually indulgent part. That doesn't trouble you guys? That's not causing any havoc?
I always forgive the indulgent part because they bring me good treats. So
Uh-huh. Yes, very nice. Uh-huh. Okay. I think that's pretty good to work with, right? Now, let me ask this question. Is there anybody in the room who can't relate to all of those parts that somebody else mentioned? Yeah. We all have a part that judges and isolates. We have a part that's anxious. We have a part that's timid. We have a part that's critical. A part that seems to be in contradiction with itself and with another part of us. And a part that goes to envy. We have these parts. That's why I like the intrapersonal world discovery in an interpersonal environment so well. So your kaleidoscope turns and there's your envy. And your willingness to look at it with an open eye and the light coming through the other side is your willingness to see it transformed not to be something that you disdain or dislike or want to disown, but something you can understand in yourself or in the other. You turn the kaleidoscope and there's a part of you that judges. And you turn it and there's a part of you that's luminous. And you turn it and the part that's compassionate shines through. And you turn it and the part that's willing to experience awe shines through. And then turn it and there's your anxious part. And all the gems are in there, making the design in the kaleidoscope. So let's sit comfortably so we can practice meditation in closing. And I'll give you a loving kindness meditation for these parts. Are you comfortable like that? That's all right. You drove a long way, didn't you?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Like 100,000 pounds of bones.
Oh. Oh. Yeah. So comfortable according to your own self, please. And then you can rest your hands in your lap as you like. You might close your eyes or bring your gaze quietly down. Invite your breathing to settle so that you notice the breath below the belly button for your inhale and your exhale. To breathe in the belly is to support the diaphragm, to do its breathing intelligence for you, and also helps to calm the brain. When I recite the lines for the loving kindness meditation, I invite you to echo them to yourself, to hear them silently in your own mind and your own heart. So if I say to you the phrase, "May I be free from unnecessary pain and suffering," you'll say to yourself, from you to you, "May I be free from unnecessary pain and suffering." If I say to you, for example, "May the part of you that experiences envy, may that part be free from unnecessary pain and suffering." You can say, "May the part of me that experiences envy be free from unnecessary pain and suffering." And so we'll go through it slowly and you can echo within. And so first to yourself in your entirety, you may say to yourself, "May I be free from unnecessary pain and suffering." May I be free from unnecessary pain and suffering. May I know peace and joy. You can say to yourself, "May I know peace and joy." And to yourself, "May I know love and harmony." May I know love and harmony. And to yourself you can say, may I and all beings everywhere be free. May I and all beings everywhere be free from unnecessary pain and suffering. And now bring to mind the part of you that is timid, the part that gets timid on whatever occasion. And to that part you may say, may you be free from unnecessary pain and suffering. To the part of you that is sometimes timid, you can say, may you be free from unnecessary pain and suffering. And may you know peace and joy. And to this part you may say, may you know love and harmony. To the part of you that is sometimes timid, you can say, may you know love and harmony. And to yourself, may I be free from the sort of suffering that arises from disliking my timid part. May I be free from the sort of suffering that arises from disliking my timid part. May I and all beings everywhere be free from unnecessary pain and suffering. And then to the part of you that can judge and isolate as a result of judgment, bring that part to mind, into your heart, into your body. And as he or she emerges, you may say to them, may you be free from unnecessary pain and suffering. To the part of you that judges, may you be free from unnecessary pain and suffering. May you know peace and joy. To the part of you that judges and then isolates as a result, you can say, may you know peace and joy. May you know love and harmony. And to yourself, may I be free from the sort of pain that arises from disliking my inner judge, or the part of me that isolates. May I be free from the sort of pain that arises from disliking the inner judge and the part that isolates. And to yourself, may I and all beings be free from unnecessary pain and suffering. And now bring to mind your anxious part. Bring him or her into your heart, into your body and your mind. And on his or her behalf, you may say, may you be free from unnecessary pain and suffering. To the inner aspect in you that experiences anxiety, you can say, may you know peace and joy. May you know love and harmony. On behalf of that part of you that's anxious, you say, may you know love and harmony. And for yourself, you may say, may I be free from the sort of pain that arises from disliking my anxious part. May I be free from the sort of pain that arises from disliking my anxious part. On your own behalf, may I and all beings be free from unnecessary pain and suffering. And to the part of you that is sometimes in contradiction, or the part that might lack integrity, or the part that goes to envy, the part that's critical, whatever part you'd like to bring to mind, to heart, to body. You may say on his or her behalf, may you be free from unnecessary pain and suffering. May you be free from unnecessary pain and suffering. May you know peace and joy. And may you know love and harmony. May you be free from the sort of pain and suffering that I impose when I dislike you, whether that's your critical part, your contradictory part, the part of you that experiences envy. You say to him or her, may you be free from the kind of suffering that I impose when I dislike you. And towards yourself, may I too be free from the sort of pain that is caused when I dislike these aspects of myself. May I and all beings everywhere be free from unnecessary pain and suffering. Without having to open your eyes, bring to mind the others in this room who you've already embodied. You know their presence is here. And we can say to each other human in the room, may each of you be free from unnecessary pain and suffering. May you know peace and joy. May you know love and harmony. And may we and all beings everywhere, courageous enough to re-encompass that expansive life, may we and all beings everywhere be free from unnecessary pain and suffering. May we and all beings everywhere experience peace and joy. May we and all beings everywhere know love and harmony. Notice how your body and your heart and your mind, even your breathing, respond when you make this prayer on behalf of others, on behalf of all beings everywhere. And join your hands in Anjali Mudra. The word Anjali means to make an offering from the heart, which we have just been doing. Thank you, everyone. Namaste.